Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my channel. I am Dianur Rahman here. On this occasion, I will continue the discussion on the next topic of my course, the Introduction to Criticism. But before that, don't forget to click the like and subscribe my channel so you don't miss all the videos created. Thank you very much. In this video, I will focus on the fourth topic in the Introduction to Criticism course. And this fourth topic, namely literary decorum and the function of literature to teach and to delight. This topic, as we can read in the course plan, is based on Horace's text Art of Poetry. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me inform you first about something. Actually, we have left the ancient Greece and let us leave Aristotle and Plato, and it's the time for us to enter into the era of Horace's thoughts during the Roman Empire, of course. As we will find out later, the traces of Plato's and Aristotle's thoughts remains a central force on which to be, let's say, to be the basic for further development of literary criticism itself. Yeah, of course, including Horace's thoughts here on the art of poetry, who tried to reconcile the struggle between literary content, which actually Plato glorified, and literary form, which Aristotle exalted or glorified as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, Horace, or in Latin we can quote it, Quintus Horatius Flaccus, who was a well-known poet during the early days of the Roman Empire, especially during the time of the Emperor Augustus. He was often asked to read and criticize the works of young poets. This art of poetry actually also a criticism and constructive instructions toward the Piso family, whose children are fond of poetry much and were in the process of becoming poets. Well, you have to know that this art of poetry is actually written originally in the form of a poetic letter, and this art of poetry successfully echoed Horace's name to become a well-known and great critic at the time. The text that we discuss here actually not in the form of poetic letter, but this has been adopted into the prose form or prosaic form so that it can be understood more easily. Criticism in the form of poetry, such as written by Horace here, actually later then also developed by the new classical writers. Let's say one of them, as we will see and discuss it later, is very visible in Alexander Pope's writing entitled An Essay on Criticism. Well, alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's go straight forward to the text of art of poetry itself. Ladies and gentlemen, Horace started the discussion with a pretty intriguing matters and pretty intriguing questions about whether we would continue to laugh if we saw a painter who was painting a horse's neck. A horse's neck, you can imagine that, and combine it with a human head, then put colorful feathers on each branch that made a beautiful woman on it, who combined it with a weird jetfish underneath. Wow, you can imagine that. We will of course answer yes, obviously we will laugh we will continue to love, or rather laugh at the paintings. It is true that artists actually, yes, according to Horace, said Horace, have the privilege to write or to paint or to express whatever they want. This is the name that we can call it as, ladies and gentlemen, we can call it as licentia poetica, or the poetic license in English. And but we could not actually, we could not and should not take this privilege into a kind of, let's say, too far. We could not take this privilege too far. For instance, to allow, we describe wild animals united with tames, as Horace also described it, as such a snake with a bird, or a lamb with a tiger, and so on and so forth. So we couldn't describe those combinations. That should not taken actually. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was the beginning of Horace's discussion actually about the appropriateness, or we later recognized it by the Latin term decorum itself. Well, for Horace, a literary work must be fit and proper, nothing less and nothing more. All aspects of literature must be balanced. This is, we can call it as a simplicity and unity, which of course will result in a balance between the form and content. So therefore, for Horace, then, the privilege of freedom of expression in art, this is, you have to underline it, or you have to make a bold this sentence. Therefore, the privilege of freedom of expression in art or literature should meet the spatial standard that every poet and aspiring poet must follow. Basically, Horace does not explicitly state these aspects. These aspects, or these 5 standards actually, yet the footprints presents them. Horace divides, the footprints means the text, the art of poetry itself presents them too. Well, Horace divided the standard into at least 5 things. Namely responsibility, and then the second one novelty, and then the third one suitability, and then the fourth one beautiful, and then the fifth one is affecting. So let's explore 5 decided concepts. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, first about responsibility, we can see on page 73 in my book actually. As it stated very straightforwardly that a poet must be able to measure his own ability to present a work of art. So you can open this book on page 73. Horace stated, you who write, take a subject equal to your powers, and consider at length how much your shoulders can bear. Neither proper nor words, nor lucid order will be lacking to the writer who chooses a subject within his powers. The accents and charm of the arrangement, I believe, consists in the ability to say only what needs to be said at the time, deferring or omitting many points for the moment. That was Horace's statements in this book on page 73. So Horace's statement previously that I have quoted clearly show responsibility. That a good poet is he who can measure his own abilities by saying it is enough to write, to what needs to be written. Then actually this means that a good literary work is a work that can be explained in the back to others, to the readers, why he wrote those things. This is a form of responsibility from a poet to his work as well as to the leadership as a whole. Well, then the second one, ladies and gentlemen, this is about novelty. Still on page 73, you can also open the book and continued on page 74 actually. We can see this concept as a continuation of Aristotle's concept mimesis as recreation. Aristotle stated that literature can describe, really to be more alive, and Horace captures this concept. Horace catch this concept very well by saying the following: in addition to using taste and care in arranging words, so you will express yourself most effectively if you give novelty to a familiar words by means of a skillful setting. That was on page 73, and this is the sentences on page 74. All mortal things shall perish. Still less the currency and charm of the words always endure. Many words that have lapsed in use will be reborn, and many now in high repute will die, if custom wills it, within whose power lie in the judgment, rule, and the standard speech. Well, from those sentences, from those statements, I think we can grasp, we can understand that Horace wants newness. Horace wants novelty in the use of the language. This novelty certainly includes all syntactic and semantic structures. Therefore, the new meanings created are a cliche, and what also does, and can make the picture of reality become newer and more alive and more alive. We are in an age, actually, ladies and gentlemen, that is certainly different from the previous ages, and will definitely be different from the age afterwards as well. Therefore, if we wish to use old and new dictions, we must also pay attention to what his standard, to what the standard of the time of speech from our time is, so that we don't lose the meaning at all. And then we can also fit to the context. We can fit the context. At the end of the explanation, I'm going to explain this kind of concept of novelty in some few lines of Indonesian poem. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, the next one is we come to the third standard concept, and this we can call it as the suitability. Alright, suitability, we can read on page 74 and also 75 in my book. If, ladies and gentlemen, if you know that the concept of novelty emphasizes more the compatibility to the language with the times, then the concept of suitability is meant here about how the language used by the poet matches the genre chosen for writing. This includes, for instance, the use of written. they use the metrical patterns in poetry. If we want to express the actions, or the kings and suffering caused by war, for instance, then poets can use dactylic hexameter. If we want to draw something like the elegy, elegy, a poem telling about sadness. So if we want to write an elegy, we can use a mixture of hexameter and pentameter, and we can also use iambic for a more realist impression. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to know that according to Horace, comedy and tragedy also uses this metrical pattern for its fits best dialects, which reduce the sound for the audience and are suitable for accent. For Horace, this suitability is very important because the supposed subject for comedy should not be written in a poem where the subject is only suitable for tragedy, for instance. Nor the ordinary, nor can the banquet of Thyestes, according to Horace, in the tragedy of Thyestes, can be equated with the lines, that speak only of the ordinary people, which is of course only suitable for comedy. According to Horace, so let its style get its own portion. Let its style get into its own portion, since, according to Horace again, it cannot understand the clear differences between its own. Since Horace thinks that since I cannot understand the clear differences between literary genres, so why should I be called a poet? It means that every poet should know, should understand, should recognize what he wants to write in the kind of genre itself. And with a similar shame, is it better for me to be ignorant than not to try to know? It means that every poet, every good poet, every good writing should be in terms of practice, something like that. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this question was actually raised by Horace in order to convince all of the readers, and in this case, in this art of poetry, actually to convince the peaceful family to whom he wrote that being a good poet is neither is in one time becoming, because we must continue to learn about, we must continue to learn about the various forms, the various genres of literary work itself. In a well-English literary context, I personally can give a concrete example that the characters that William Shakespeare created in his plays, actually, like kings, queens, in all the novels, must always speak in iambic or iambic form to show the aristocratic side in a more realist impression, while peripheral characters such as the servants, the bodyguards, must have spoken in varying meters, like dactylic or something like trochaic, and so on and so forth, something like that. Well, okay, alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the next one. We come now to the form. to the fourth and fifth standard. Actually, we could not separate this 4 and 5 standards, since this is a kind of a unified and inseparable concept, which is beautiful and affecting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have got the book, so you can also open page 74. Open page 74, and we can read that as a whole. And this is a direct response to Aristotle's concept, actually, of the consistency of the character displayed or shown in his dialectics. According to Horace, then, a beautiful language construction is not enough. A beautiful language construction only is not enough. So something like that. Because we must also be able to arouse feelings, to arouse emotions as desired by the reader. Well, poets must, in general, poets must be able to create, let's say, the characters that are presented in a drama or literary work in general as convincingly as possible. If we want our readers to cry, then we as poets must feel the sadness first. That was said by Horace. Alright, and then the words must be precise. Sad words are appropriate for suffering phase. Rage is suitable only for those who are angry, and jokes are for joy, and serious words are for solemn, like ceremonies and so on and so forth. The point is whether we want to follow the tradition or want to create something new in this concept must remain consistent with this principle, beautiful and affecting. So it is not enough for poems to be beautiful, but it must be affecting as well. Beautiful and affecting is are inseparable concept. That's something like that. So those are the 5 standards, actually, as I have explained it just now. The 5 standards from the art of poetry by Horace, for the poets, if they want to write literary works, something like that. Well, it is also known as literary decorum. It is also known as literary decorum. This is, of course, also becomes a basis for critics, for us, for the student of the introduction to criticism, for all people who desire in criticism, then to consider the quality of a work, whether the work we are criticizing has or follows these 5 standards or not, something like that. The subsequent passages in the art of poetry, actually, before arriving at the concept of the utile et dulce, or just not overly emphasize a thick theoretical concept or a thick theoretical element, even appear more sporadic, because they only deal with the explanation of literary tradition of this time, of the Roman Empire time at the time, which is still basically in Hellenistic world or Hellenistic culture, especially in referring to the theoretical foundations presented by Aristotle, by Plato, and so on and so forth. This can be seen, for instance, in Horace's discussion of a good point, a good plot, which includes a play that should not be more than 5 acts, without the concept of Deus ex machina, or intervention in the plot to overcome the political conflict by presenting one event or one character as if it were God who immediately resolves the conflict. So, following Aristotle here, the concept Horace also re-explained the function of the chorus in music. Chorus and music in a drama, the forms of the rhythm, and then a little about the history or the origins of drama, special instructions to young poets, and then what else? This is also about several other things that I think haven't too urgent yet for me to serve here, for me to explain here as a main course, particularly for the instruction to young poets, which include the main prerequisites to become a poet or writer. It seems also that it will be more interesting if they are served as the main course in the creative writing, for instance, rather than the introduction to criticism. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue to the discussion on which is on the next discussion, which is a kind of continuation of the principles of literary decorum itself. Now we come to the concept of literary function. Literary function that I intend to mean here is about to teach and to delight. Well, ladies and gentlemen, according to Horace, as we can read on pages 81 up to 82 in my book, actually, there are two purposes for poets or writers to write literary works. There are two purposes for poets or writers to write literary work. Namely, one, to provide us with instructions or learning. This is a kind to inform or to teach, to inform, to instruct, to teach. That was the same thing, the same diction, or let's say the synonym of the instruction itself. And then the second or two, to give us pleasure, to or in the Latin famous phrase, we can quote it, we can combine it to instruct and to pleasure, to delight, as utile et dulce. Utile means to instruct, to give an information, to give an instructions, to give an moral view, something like that, and then to delight us with the beautiful language, with the beautiful structure of the form itself, with the touching compositions, something like that. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that was the utile et dulce, and it is providing the moral values or the learning, or let's say the instruction itself, belief in that instruction, so that ladies and gentlemen, so that we as readers can grasp, can catch the message quickly and master it correctly. So why is it like that? It is complicated. The literary work, which is more complicated, nonsense, and excessive words, for only to explain certain moral values. For instance, that will be useless. Actually, that will be useless. Because the human brain is tired. The human brain is tired for all of these things. In other words, coming let's say in bahasa Indonesia, keluar dari telinga, masuk dari telinga kanan, keluar dari telinga kiri, something like that. Coming from the right here and then out also from the left one, so something like that. Why I should translate it, I don't know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue. So literary works, literary works is not scriptures. Literary work is not the holy scriptures. Literary work is not the Bible. Literary work is not the Quran, for instance. Literary work is not something sacred. No. So be brief in giving some instructions, be brief in giving some moral teaching, something like that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue. So this was expressed by Horace, considering that socio-cultural things, the socio-cultural context of the time revolved around the contradiction of let's say the contradiction between the literary form and literary content. This is also, let's say, a good reconciliation from the things that we can understand, as we have discussed earlier, in Plato concept, for instance, and then Aristotle's concept, for instance. So this is a kind of good reconciliation between Plato and Aristotle's concept about glorifying literary content in one sense, which is Plato glorified, and something that related to the literary form, which is actually Aristotle exalted or glorified as well. Alright, something like that. And then this kind of literary form and content, at the time, at Horace's time actually, old people in Rome at the time strongly denounced poetry, which was weak in learning, weak in moral values, and weak in wisdom of life. So they strictly denounced, they strictly banned the literary work which is less having those kind of things. And while the youth people, or the youth generations, actually rejected and scorned the poetry which was strict with those things. So according to Horace, it is precisely what can combine the usefulness and enjoyment, the usefulness, the utility, the utile, and the enjoyment and the dulce itself, that will become the winner in the hearts of the readers. Books like those things later can make money for the publishers, and we read by readers around the world, will read by readers around the world, will be read, by readers around the world, so as to be able to spread the fame of the author as well. This is the peaceful effort made by Horace, that with this utile et dulce itself, the utile et dulce principle, Horace is considered as the one who was successful in reconciling the battle between teacher and student, between Plato and Aristotle, between the literary content and the literary form, or something like that. In the context of that kind of combination of the utile et dulce, we are really invited to measure, the quality of a good literary work. It is true that there are works that are insignificant, which are trivial, which only rely on, let's say, something to the element of pleasurable form by playing in the realm of entertaining language only, but on the other hand, are very weak in the context of moral learning or moral teaching or something like hikmah in Bahasa Indonesia, something like that. It is true that there are also including verses from the scriptures in what is that? There are also novels, there are also poems, there are also short stories, for instance. There are really, strictly taken from, let's say, the scripture or the Holy Scripture, something like that, but weak in the element of the pleasurable form, which can entertain the reader. So, again and again, according to Horace, so what's good is, again, according to Horace, is a work that can combine the two, that can combine the pleasurable things and then also the useful things, or something like that. There are benefits, wisdom, value that we can get from, let's say, the literary work itself, but at the same time, we are also entertained. We are also, our emotions are torn, which we read when we read them, when we read the literary work. The pleasure here is the pleasure of form. Once again, I emphasize, I made an emphasis on this sentence, on this statement. The pleasure here is actually the pleasure of form, means the pleasure of the structure, means the pleasure of the beautiful composition of the language, for instance, means the let's say that the pleasure when we read the mathematical combination or something like the, let's say, the rhyming pattern, for instance, and so on and so forth. Again and again, I would like to say that the pleasure here, not like something like the pleasure of the heart, which is flowering, blossoming when we fall in love, for instance. No, but the pleasure here is actually related to the form of the work, or something like that. So in a tiniest way, we are pleased when we read a poem that uses an interesting and rhyme, for instance, as I have said before, and a simple what is that? A perfect combination of the rhythm. Well, something like that, as simple as that. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, now, as I promised you earlier, that I'd love to give you an example of the novelty, the concept of novelty in, let's say, in the Indonesian poems. Some few lines of the Indonesian poem. I'm taking here the poem entitled Pastoral from Acep Zamzam Nur. Only 2 lines from the poem Pastoral, and then I'm going to read it now. Senja mengental dalam gelas kopiku dan kureguk sebagai puisi yang pahit. So how come senja, which is actually a kind of time subsequent, but it is related with the verb mengental. Mengental is something like related to something liquid, and then mengental in gelas kopi, dalam gelas kopiku, dan kureguk, and I drink, dan kureguk sebagai puisi yang pahit. That was actually, one of the things related to the concept of novelty. How come those subsequent time, what is that? How come the subsequent time is actually combined with the verb which is not really related to each other, and then also resulting the meanings, the new meanings resulting, some novelty in the things of the meaning itself, and then in the composition, and also the syntactic structures as well as semantic, and so on and so forth. So that was the example, one example from the concept of novelty itself. I think the older concept, the older standards are have given the what is that? Have been given the examples in Horace's own text out of poetry. You can only consult again and again to the text of the art of poetry, and then try to understand more while also watching and listening my presentation, my explanation here. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think it looks like enough for this video. I apologize for not explaining all the things related to the art of poetry. Yet this is the risk for such a kind of explanation like this one, which is only trying to summarize writing. Hopefully, this summary itself does not make you lazy to read, because only by reading the entire text, I think that we can grasp, we can catch, we can understand, we can comprehend what is that, the meaning comprehensively. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching my video, and see you next week for the next video. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.